Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to another daily meditation for Monday, April the 20th. Looking forward to speaking with you for the next few minutes. And this week, what I'd like to do is I want to take a look at a series of appearances that Jesus made after his resurrection to his disciples. And this is also one of those areas that I don't often get a lot of time to do a lot of thinking and teaching and reading about because, frankly, when Easter season rolls around, you got time to get Jesus out of the tomb, and then pretty much you have to move on to new things. But with these daily meditations, I'm able to unpack some of those events. There's actually quite a bit of biblical information about the time in between Jesus' resurrection and his ascension. He appeared several times to his disciples and really shared a lot of really interesting and informative stuff that really we don't spend enough time thinking about, I don't think. So I want to take time this week, and each day we're going to spend some time mostly in the Gospel of John, chapters 20 and maybe 21 if I have time on Thursday. We'll see how that goes. But I'm really looking forward to spending a few more days just kind of unpacking the resurrection and seeing how all of Jesus' disciples respond to this remarkable event, this one-of-a-kind event that caught all of them off guard and was the greatest news anyone could possibly hear. And I hope it'll sound as good news to you as well, and that as you reflect upon Jesus as the risen Savior, that there'll be things about his appearances to his disciples that'll be really powerful and meaningful and helpful to you. Today I want to start where the text starts with the very first appearance that Jesus made to someone after his resurrection. And if you've read the story at all, you're pretty familiar with this. If you've been to church and heard an Easter sermon before, you probably heard a sermon about the appearance of Jesus to Mary Magdalene. The very first appearance was to her. Now, if you go back a little bit in the story, back to Luke chapter 8, verse 1 and 2, which I highly recommend, by the way. Really interesting, some of the small details that we don't often take a lot of time to think about. Just the practical ways that Jesus' ministry and his traveling ministry especially, how that actually happened. First of all, something we don't often think about, most of Jesus' teaching and preaching was in a pretty small geographical area. Not necessarily, I don't know about you, but I picture Jesus and his disciples traveling, like crisscrossing the country back and forth all over the place. And the truth is that from what we can tell, he stays in a pretty small region in the northern part of the country, and then he'll make trips to do certain things in certain places. He goes through Samaria. He goes down to Jerusalem for the festivals. He'll cut across the Jordan River and do different things. So Jesus didn't necessarily travel as much as we may imagine that he might have traveled. And also, we don't often think about who he traveled with. When Jesus traveled somewhere, often I imagine in my head Jesus and his 11 disciples, or 12, following behind him. So you got 13 guys, and they're around a campfire, and one of them's, got the short stick, and so they're the ones cooking that night. And what do they have? They, whatever they could catch or whatever they could buy in the city or whatever. And they're just a bunch of guys, a bunch of dudes hanging out around a campfire, having a good time. And I'm sure that there were some moments that were like that. But Luke chapter 8, verses 1 and 2 clues us into the fact that when Jesus would take a ministry trip, or he would go someplace to preach and to teach, he would take like a whole entourage with him. In fact, there's a list of women that went along with him. And one of those women that's mentioned by name is Mary Magdalene. Now, these women that followed after Jesus, they ministered to him on these trips. They took care of him. They provided for him financially. Some of these women who went along on these journeys with Jesus had financial means that they brought to the picture. Remember, Jesus can't work to support himself. He doesn't have time for that. And so he's leaning upon the financial donations of his followers, and these women would travel with him and the disciples to a certain area, and they would provide for his needs while he was there teaching. And Mary, like I said, was one of these ladies. Now, Mary was unique in that Mary had a backstory. And her backstory, if you read Luke chapter 8, verse 2, and also Mark chapter 16, verse 9, Mary had a very specific backstory with Jesus. Jesus had met her at a time in her life when she was under extreme emotional and spiritual just oppression. And she was being oppressed and actually possessed by 7 demons, apparently all at the same time, inside of her body, controlling her actions and basically making her life as close to a living hell as you can possibly imagine. And the text doesn't tell us exactly how he did it, but we know that Jesus set her free and released her from the bondage that she had to 7 demons. And so when Mary hangs out with Jesus, she's not just curious about Jesus and what miracles he might do next. She's not somebody who's maybe even incredibly fascinated by, all of his deep teachings and his proverbs. This is a woman who has had her life radically changed and transformed by Jesus. And I have a feeling she follows him more out of just a sense of love and appreciation and respect and admiration and a desire to be close to him more than she is about anything else. And she's one of these women that travels around with Jesus everywhere she goes. It's incredibly likely that Mary spent about as much time with Jesus as anybody else. We don't hear a lot about her in the gospel accounts, but we know from the gospels that she's in the background as most of the stories we remember about Jesus are happening. We know at the end of Jesus' life, at the end of his ministry, that she came down to Jerusalem with Jesus for the Passover feast. She's there that whole final week, the Holy Week. She's there in the crowd. She's probably there listening to his teachings. She's probably in the room at the Last Supper, or she's outside the room, maybe like serving the meal, or maybe having a separate meal, Passover with the women, or however it was exactly that Jesus managed that. But she was hanging around with Jesus all the way up to the very end. John 19 tells us that she was standing near the cross and listened to and heard Jesus' final words. I mean, her dedication to Jesus, you could argue, was stronger than any of that of the 12 disciples who abandoned Jesus when the soldiers came to take him away. She probably had observed him from a distance, and she was there at the cross, even at the very end, watching him as he gave his life. She heard all of those famous last words I talked about a couple of Sundays ago, and it must have had a powerful impact on her, because when Joseph of Arimathea comes to take Jesus' body down from the cross and bury him in the tomb, guess who's tagging along? That's right, it's Mary. Mary, who just can't let Jesus go. She can't just walk away. She's so faithful. She's so loyal to Jesus that even though it's all over, she wants to be there for the burial. And we find out from the text, and all the gospel writers agree on this point, she is one of the key figures who wants to prepare Jesus' body for burial. And she has spices and ointment that she and some of the other ladies had assembled to bring back on the very first day after the Sabbath, after Jesus had died. And she was going to anoint his body and prepare it for kind of more of a long-term funeral or burial type situation. And that, of course, is when everything crazy happens, right? So you have this woman who's 100% committed. She's faithful. She doesn't care who knows it. She doesn't care what consequences might come to her, but she is there with Jesus all the way through his death, his burial, and now she comes to the tomb, and she's the very first person to discover that the tomb, the stone, has been rolled away and the tomb is empty. The very worst case scenario in her mind that could have happened has happened. Someone, some traitor, some enemy has come and stolen her master's body away. She can't even show his body the proper respect and love and adoration that she wants to with these spices and these ointments to prepare his body for burial. She can't even do that now. The body is completely gone. So she does what any responsible person would do. She runs back to the group of disciples that are kind of all huddled together, and she tells them what's happening. The tomb's empty. They've taken the Lord's body. We don't know where it is. You may remember the story. Peter and John run to the tomb, and John got there first. It's possible John is younger than Peter, and so Peter's chugging along behind, and John is just young and maybe in better shape, and so he runs and gets there first, and they both look in, and they confirm that Mary's story is true. The tomb is empty. But then the interesting thing about Peter and John is they look at it, they kind of go, I wonder what's going on with that. And then they just go back. They go back to their house or wherever house they were staying. But Mary can't leave. Mary can't leave. And that's where I pick up the story here in John chapter 20, verse 11. And this is what the text says. It says, "But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. And as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. They said to her, 'Woman, why are you weeping?' And she said to them, 'They've taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him.'" Can you see how this is powerfully moving her emotionally? This isn't just some thing that's happening. She's not in shock. She's not emotionless. She's not a robot just getting things through and getting it done. She is fully connected to her emotions, and she is unable to hold back the tears. She's standing outside the tomb, and I imagine in her head she's thinking, how could this be true? How could not only he be dead, but how could they have had the indignity to steal his body, and now we can't even honor him properly? And she's just broken and in pain, and as so many of us can identify with in times of grief, she just loses it. She just kind of loses her mind and just starts sobbing outside the tomb. Well, she looks inside and she sees these two figures in the tomb. Now, she's probably enough in shock, and the text doesn't record some big surprise on her part, but they ask her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" And she can only reply what she told Peter and John. They've taken my master's body away, and I don't know where it is. And at that point, I imagine she would have continued to have a conversation, but at that point, she senses that there's another person that has come close to the tomb. And of course, we know that that person is Jesus, but she doesn't know it. In fact, the text makes it clear she thinks it's somebody completely different. Take a look at verse 14. Verse 14. Verse 14 says, "Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus. And Jesus said to her, the same thing that the two guys inside the tomb said to her, 'Woman, why are you weeping? Who are you seeking?' Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, 'Sir, if you've carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away.'" It's really interesting. Jesus did this a lot after the resurrection. When he would appear to his disciples, he would almost play this game with them. And I don't think he's being unkind or cruel, but he's sort of hiding a little bit from them. And he's letting them sort of discover him in their own time. And Mary at this point can't quite recognize him. I don't know if maybe he was wearing a cloak and it was covering his face. I don't know if maybe he looked a little different. I don't know if she was just such in shock. She saw him and it just didn't click. But she just doesn't see him. She sees Jesus, but she doesn't recognize it's Jesus. She thinks he's just the gardener. They're kind of straightening up, Larry Morganing everything to make sure it's beautiful and wonderful for everybody who comes to the garden, to the tombs, to mourn their loved ones, and she doesn't know what's going on. So she just repeats what she had said. "I don't know where my Lord is. If you've taken him, maybe you took him. If you've taken him away, where did you take him? I'll take him." You can see she's still 100% committed. She wants desperately to honor Jesus. And then, to me, probably the most beautiful moment in the entire story happens. Verse 17. Verse 16 says this, "Jesus said to her," one word, "Mary." One word. And in that one word, she sees through it all. She sees through the disguise. She sees through her own shock. And she recognizes Jesus. Mary. Now, I've wondered this sometimes. Why did Jesus pick Mary to be the first person he saw and talked to after the resurrection? Why Mary? If you remember, Peter and John were literally just there like 10 minutes before. And they're two of the 12 disciples, two of like the famous guys who ends up writing a lot of the Bible, right? why wouldn't Jesus appear to them? They seem to be the most important figures, right? Prominent figures, special. Mary, we barely know anything about Mary. And yet he chooses Mary to appear to her. And he chooses to reveal himself to her by tenderly saying her name. I absolutely love this interaction. I love this interaction because what it shows me is that post-resurrection Jesus is a lot like pre-resurrection Jesus. He is someone who is intensely personal. I don't know if you've picked this up about Jesus yet in your life. But Jesus doesn't love humanity. He doesn't love the crowd. He doesn't love the group. He doesn't love the world in aggregate. Okay? Jesus loves individuals. He loves people. And he loves us one at a time. He knows each one of us. He knows our names. He knows our backstory. He knows our pain. He sees everything. He recognizes us as individuals. And he chooses to meet with us as individuals in those moments of pain, in those moments of loss, in those moments of confusion. And sometimes he just steps into the middle of it in a very unexpected way, and he just says our name. And Mary's life never was the same after that. I love the rest of the text. If you listen to what she says, it says, Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher or my teacher. And then Jesus said to her, do not cling to me. Now, why did he have to say that? I think it's because of something that John doesn't record. She ran to him. As soon as she recognized it was him, as soon as she heard him say her name, there was nothing that was going to stop her from running to Jesus. Now, I don't know if she threw her arms around his neck and held him in a bear hug. I don't know if she fell on her knees and reached out and grabbed him around the legs. I have no idea how, but we know that she made physical contact with Jesus. This dear heart who had spent how many years of her life, we don't know, imprisoned and possessed by horrifying, destructive demons, had been set free by Jesus, had followed him around, had heard his teaching, seen his miracles, watched him die, and now here he is back to life again, and she can't contain it. He knew her name. He called her name, and she had to run to him. And so she did. She grabs him somehow. She holds on to him. And he's like, look, Mary. I've got things I got to do. Don't hold on to me. I know we could sit and talk all day. We could get caught up on where I've been and why this happened and what's happening next. And there's all kinds of questions you must have for me. But listen, Mary, I've got a job for you to do. Look what it says in the text in verse 17. Do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my what? My brothers. And say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Jesus gives Mary a job to do. He says, Mary, you've been faithful. You stuck with me through the whole thing. Here I am. I'm announcing myself to you, Mary, personally, individually, you. And I want you to take this message to other people and tell them, Mary, tell them it worked. Tell them that God is not our judge anymore. Tell them that he's our God. He's our Father again, that we can be forgiven because of what I did. Tell them, Mary, that I'm heading home to my Father very soon, but I want to see them again before I go because I have some important instructions to pass along to them. And Mary, I want you to be the one to go tell them. I want you to be the one. So he gives her an important job to do, an important mission. He could have shown up directly to the 11 disciples that were left. He does later. In fact, tomorrow we're going to take a look at when he shows up to the whole group. But he starts off by meeting with this dear, dear soul, this special friend. There's no way to look at this and not see that he's treating her with a great deal of kindness and tenderness and friendship. And I think he's doing it because he just wanted to comfort her in the middle of her grief. She's weeping outside the tomb, and he's alive, and he knows he's alive, and he knows what it'll mean to her to know he's alive. And so he can't just leave her there outside the tomb weeping her eyes out. So he comes and he talks to her, and then he sends her to tell other people. I'm telling you, friends, there is something special about knowing that God knows you and loves you just the way you are. And sure, he knows all your flaws too. He knows your history, the good and the bad. He knows your tendencies, both the good and the bad. He's there. He sees everything, and yet he still wants to know you. He still calls out people's names. I tell you what, people say, what will it be like to go to heaven? When you finally pass away and you go to heaven, what is it you're looking forward to? And I'll tell you what, I got a lot of stuff on my list I want to see, a lot of people I want to talk to, a lot of conversations I want to have, a lot of things I want to try to ask and understand. But what I'm looking forward to more than anything, and it's not a cliche, even if it may sound like one, I'm looking forward to hearing Jesus say my name. And I have a feeling that he's going to have to tell me not to cling to him, because I'm going to want to be close to him. Mary, bless her heart, Jesus set her free, and it seems like she followed him around the rest of his life. And after he left again, she followed him into whatever life God had for her after he left. And I don't know what Mary's future was. I don't know how Mary's life ended. All I know is that she was faithful to follow her Savior. And God loved her as an individual. And God wanted to use her to send the message to the disciples. And I love her final witness. The very last time we hear about Mary Magdalene doing anything in the Bible is verse 18. She says, Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord. That's her message. I saw Jesus. I know it's crazy. I know you won't believe me, and they don't believe her at first. But I saw Jesus. He's alive. He called my name. Friends, this Jesus that we talk about, that we sing about, that we celebrate, that we remember, he's real. He's real. And he knows you. He loves you. He knows your name. And he wants to be able to count on you to be faithful to him, to stick with him just like Mary did. And he'll show up in the middle of our grief and our pain. And he'll come saying our name. And I pray for myself and for you that you'll be able to have that experience with Jesus one day. I can't wait to hear Jesus call my name. And I hope you can too. So that's the first time Jesus appeared to somebody after his resurrection. Tomorrow we'll take a look at him appearing to the whole group, because he's got some really interesting things he wants to say to them that we need to hear. But I want to leave you with Mary, and I want to leave you in that very personal, intimate, precious moment that she has with her Savior. And I want you to imagine what your first meeting with Jesus will be like. And maybe, just maybe, that'll give you enough to think about and chew upon and meditate on and worship and love your Jesus. And you know what? Why not get alone by yourself for a few minutes this evening, or after the kids go to bed, or whenever you get a chance? And why not just talk to him and tell him how much you're looking forward to seeing him, how much you're looking forward to hearing him call your name. This is all about knowing and loving Jesus. And what better way to get started than to just talk to him about what is to come, and use Mary as an example for how to reach out to him. So that's what I have today for a meditation for you from this passage. As far as announcements go, there's not a whole lot of new stuff. We're watching the news just like you guys. We're eager to find out about when the restrictions are going to start being lifted, just like you guys. We have no idea when that's going to happen, just like you guys. We're sort of in all of this. We're all in this together. And rest assured that as soon as we have word that the restrictions are going to start to be lifted, we're going to try to get right back into action to try to reconnect with you in physical, tangible ways as much as we possibly can. So please be patient. I know it's hard to be patient. I'm ready for all this to be done. I was done like weeks ago. And we just need to hang in there, trust the process, and trust that God is using this to refine us and to teach us some things and learn these lessons we need to learn now. But don't forget, the mission is still the same, right? We're still supposed to be making disciples. We may have to do it differently, and we may be focusing in on a different group of people than we normally do. Maybe we're spending more time discipling our kids. Maybe we're spending more time discipling our neighbors and trying to reach out to them with the love of Jesus. I don't know. But either way, keep the mission going. This is weird and this is not fun, but the mission has not changed. We can keep focusing on that. We can keep growing. And I'm telling you, friends, you know this to be true. Human contact matters more now than it ever has. So reach out to somebody over the phone. Reach out to somebody on Facebook. Send somebody a text. Do a FaceTime chat with somebody where you can look them in the eyes. Do what my small group did yesterday, and it was really kind of fun and goofy and silly at the same time. Get together for a Zoom meeting and have 25 different people trying to talk at the same time and sharing prayer requests and praying together and showing off the insides of our house as we try to find a quiet place to do a Zoom meeting. Just be creative to find ways to continue to make disciples during this strange time of quarantine and isolation. But the Lord will be faithful to us, and he'll help us as we seek to do that. And if you're free tomorrow at 4 p.m., come on back here to Facebook or to YouTube, and I'll have another meditation on the resurrection for you tomorrow that I hope will be challenging for you as well. In the meantime, know that you're loved, know that you're being prayed for, know that you are being supported, and know that we'll be on the other end of the line if you pick up the phone to call us. We love you, and we're looking forward to reconnecting with you again soon. God bless. See you tomorrow at 4 if you're available. Bye-bye.